Hey folks, Patrick Francie here, host of my podcast, The Everyday Millionaire, inviting you to listen in on my conversation today with my guest, David Morrison. After beginning his career as a lawyer, David moved on to found Morrison Financial Services way back in 1987 with the objective of providing tailored asset-based financing to small and medium-sized businesses. Under his leadership as CEO, Morrison Financial is now one of Canada's longest-standing private finance firms and one of the largest and most diverse private financiers in Canada. David's mission was always to provide more than just capital and seek to play a vital role in helping small to medium-sized businesses succeed in Canada. Morrison's financing and investment approach is disciplined, it's prudent, but it's flexible in providing creative solutions for their clients. In all cases, Morrison views themselves as partners, not simply financiers. In my conversation with David, he shares some of his many lessons learned on this amazing journey of achieving extraordinary results over the past 40 years. Listen in, enjoy. His career as a lawyer, David Morrison founded Morrison Financial Services Limited in 1987 with the objective to providing tailored asset-based financing to small and medium-sized businesses. David enjoys every aspect of his role, from being a member of the credit committee to planning and steering his company's development and watching his team grow. David has recently been appointed a member of the Ontario Securities Commission Investment Fund's Technical Advisory Committee for a 2-year term. This commitment advises the OSC staff on technical compliance, challenges in the investment fund's product regulatory regime, and highlights opportunities for improving alignment between investor, industry, and regulatory goals. He is also a member of the Technical Advisory Committee that provides industry input to the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario in relation to the mortgage industry. And as much as that is about his technical bio, if you will, this was an amazing conversation with a very wise individual who took his success and his many years of experience and really shared a lot of what he's gained. And in this conversation today, we went down lots of paths and lots of rabbit holes, as we are apt to do, but lots of lessons to take away here today, folks. Listen in. Let's get to work. David Morrison, welcome to the Everyday Millionaire podcast. Glad to have you on the show, man.
Thank you for having me.
So, David, I always open for my viewers, my listeners, in this case, listeners, but, I always have to open with the question of, if somebody walks up and says, "So, David, what do you do?" Now, you're well into your career, into life. How do you answer these days? Because you've covered a lot of ground.
I'm the owner-operator of a financial services company. I'm actually a lawyer by profession. I only practiced for 3 short years. I knew probably within the first 15 minutes of practicing law that it was not going to be my career. I was working at a large downtown law firm, and I just knew. And it was intuitive. And I spent most of the 3 years that I was practicing trying to figure out what I would do next. Although in those 3 years, I was actually pretty good at what I was doing, but knew I would leave it. And I started in 1987 a financial services company that bears my name, Morrison Financial. And my resume gets pretty boring after that because it's the only job that I've had since.
Well, there you go. There you go. Well, it's interesting. An old friend of mine who was a lawyer at one point, if I ask him, what do you do these days? And he, or some version of that question, he always answers with, well, first off, I'm a recovering lawyer. And, he's kind of in that place. And interestingly enough, in my retail store in Edmonton, my retail business, which I've had for 38 years now, I had hired a young guy about 2 or 3 years ago. Interestingly enough, he passed the bar, spent 6 months as a lawyer at a firm, and went, I don't want to be a lawyer. And he quit being a lawyer. And he came out and helped assisted in managing my store for a couple of years, hit it out of the park. He was amazing. And yeah, he was just taking a break from anything too hot and heavy. And he was great at retail. He moved on, which was not a surprise. But anyways, I share that only because not everybody wants to be a lawyer, even once they become a lawyer, I guess.
So Patrick, I should mention that, today it's quite commonplace for people to graduate from law, maybe practice a little bit, and then leave law. It's almost practically a norm.
Wow.
When I did it, though, it was really outrageous. Like, I mean, people couldn't figure it out. It was the mid '80s, and a whisper campaign went around among peers that maybe I'd been asked to leave by the partners, or maybe something had happened. Maybe I screwed up on a file. And none of that was true, but it was so unusual. We were getting what seemed like big bonuses in those days. And I was in a downtown Toronto firm. I was where it's at. I was where everybody was reaching for when we went into law school. And then one day I just announced that I'm leaving. And to give you an idea how unusual it was, a couple of years later, Canadian Business Magazine did a feature article. I was on the cover of the magazine. It was called Life After Law.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
They were interviewing lawyers that had left the practice of law because it was considered so unusual, and they wanted to know why. And I was sort of featured as the candidate, and I just talked about why I left and what I was doing since. And they featured some other lawyers as well who had done the same thing, but it was sufficiently unusual that they actually did an article on this, and I thought that.
Blasphemy. So why was it that you left? Just out of curiosity, seeing as we're on that topic, why is it that you left law?
Well, it was bad then. I think it's worse today. Okay, that the legal profession has a serious problem with its business model, and I don't think anybody's happy. Okay, nobody. Okay, I don't think the clients are happy. I don't think the lawyers are happy. Nobody wins, and the reason why is because it's a profession where there really is no meaningful leverage, okay, of capital. I mean, you can get the model under which I grew up was that you come in as a young lawyer, an articling student, you work your way up, the partners dump on you tons of work, you're working 60, 70, 80-hour weeks, and they're scraping the sweat off your back, and that's fine, okay? But the moment, it became apparent that the moment that, a partner had 3 or 4 or 5 in his group that he was able to leverage it that way, eventually at some point they would say, why are we working for the old man? You know what I mean? And then they split off, and it was very difficult to build on something that would produce for you because it was all based on other people's labor.
Mm-hmm.
And relatively expensive labor, and everybody wanted to sort of move up, and all you could do was just keep charging higher fees. That was the only way you could make more money or get where you wanted to go. And it's just become so expensive for the consumer. The middle class has no access to justice these days because it's simply too expensive, and the system is too burdened and too slow. And I just didn't like it as a business model. When I won a case, it was, that bastard should have never sued me in the first place. It was the facts that won the case. It had nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
When I lost the case, it was my fault.
So kind of like a thankless job on top of it all.
Yeah, I just thought that the whole business model was no good. If somebody wanted to do it, it was fine with me, but it was not what I wanted to do.
So so that's interesting. So you go into financial services business, and you've built your practice over a number of years. But what took you kind of down that path?
So I actually, at the time that I was looking to leave, okay, I just want to finish one last point on that.
Sure, please.
In law, you bill your time. You keep track of your time.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I remember saying to my wife, because I left right at about the time I got married, I only know of one other place where they do that. And that's sort of in prison. You put that chalk on the wall and you get 5 days and you crush somebody, and that's a week,
Yeah.
And I said, I don't want to be in any occupation where I have to account for and keep track of my time. And that was a really important criterion to me. So I was looking at a number of different businesses. I looked at, I think, 55 businesses in total before I could see what I wanted to be in. And one of the things that I learned very, very wasn't right away, but well into the task, was that nothing that is advertised for sale, nothing that is advertised for sale is worth buying. Okay. When you have a business that has a value and you want to sell it, you don't have to advertise it. You already know who the best buyer is, and it's likely one of your longtime competitors. And you can call them up and you can say, let's have coffee. And you can do a deal over a napkin in a restaurant or a coffee shop because the competitor understands the inherent value of your company. He has the same customers. He understands the contribution margin that it would bring to his business. If you're advertising your business for sale, it means that you don't really know who would want it. And so I spent a lot of time looking at ads, and none of them ultimately proved out to have anything attractive to me. I did, however, back in 1986, notice a classified ad where somebody said lucrative business for sale. It was a name. I won't mention the name at this point in time. And it has a telephone number. I mean, the name wasn't in the ad, but the telephone number led to the name. And he described a financial services business that he had set up. It was a factoring company, actually. It was factoring auto body invoices from auto body shops to insurance companies. And it kind of intrigued me. It was just lucrative business for sale, telephone number. And I called the person and I made some notes, and I still have those notes in the side drawer of my desk. And during the conversation, I realized that he was missing the point. This was an individual who was doing his MBA, and he set up this business on the side. And the reason he was leaving the business was because it was taking too much of his time and it was interfering with his studies. He wanted to sell it for $25,000. And I said, okay, well, let's meet. And I never did hear from him again. He said, I'll get back to you. It occurred to me sometime later that he had sold the business to somebody else, which was fine. But while I was waiting to meet with him, I started thinking about it. And I said, I understand what he's doing. I understand what his market is. I understand how he does it. He might have a computer program that he thinks has some value, but that would be easy to recreate. And I just started thinking to myself, I could just do this myself. I don't have to hear from him. But what was also nagging at me was, in my view, that he had missed the point. He was doing all the work himself. And that's why it was taking all the time. I ended up leaving my practice of law and setting up a similar business in the same space. And what I did, however, was he is involved going on the road and delivery and pickup and all this kind of stuff. I ended up not doing any of that. I simply ran the central hub, and I hired 6 road representatives to go out and do the part. And I gave them commission territories, and it was successful from the get-go. Within 2 years, I was earning 5 times my legal income. And I wasn't keeping track of my time. I mean, I was loving what I was doing. I was working the hours that an entrepreneur works, but I wasn't keeping track of my time. I was basically leveraging capital in a defined space, and I had road representatives that were out there. I was managing the hub, and I was able to create all kinds of efficiencies that you couldn't get in the way that he was operating. And that's how I got launched. We were purchasing receivables due to auto body shops from insurance companies for repair work that had been done. And that was the sole business at the time. And I managed to diversify from there. If you want to hear that story, I can.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because it really is. I mean, how long have you this has been many years later now. You've got Morrison Financial Services. And tell me a little bit about the journey of morphing from what you were doing, and how much has it changed? Is it a mere shadow of its former self? Is there, fundamentally things are similar? Where are you at on the journey overall now?
Oh, I'll give you that story. So when I was buying the auto body claims, the invoices and billing the insurance companies and all that, I mean, I managed to build that up into, we were doing about $3 million of volume a month, and it was producing revenues of $150,000 to $180,000 a month. This is way back in
Sure.
in 87,
Big money back then. Big money back then.
It was really nice money back then.
Yeah.
But what happened was, in about 4 years into the business, I got approached by somebody who, at the time, Shoppers Drug Mart was kind of unifying its purchasing. Like, you used to sell to an individual store, but now they had this central distribution center.
Sure.
And someone wanted me to buy a Shoppers Drug Mart invoice that was going to be payable in 30 or 60 days. It was a $100,000 invoice or thereabouts. And I didn't know really anything about that. And I kind of hemmed and hawed at the opportunity. But then I thought, it's really not that different from the auto body claims that I was buying, except it was a lot larger. It was 50 times the size. My average claim back then in auto body repair was $200 or $2,500.
Sure.
I was making maybe $120 or $150 on a transaction that would open and close in 60 or 90 days. And so it was, but conceptually, this was the same thing. So you know what I said? I'm going to try one. And I bought the invoice, and I charged the same rate as I charged, and it was good for him. It was good for me. 30 days later, the check comes in, and from Shoppers Drug Mart. And I kind of said to myself, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to use foul language in this podcast.
We go all over the map here, buddy. You use whatever language you want.
I basically said, holy shit, I just did 50 auto body transactions in one.
Right.
Like, I just equivalent of 50 transactions. And at the time, I had about 20 people working in the office doing admin. I said, I could do the same volume with a quarter of these people if I just increased my transaction size. And so I started to get very interested in that factoring invoice purchasing business that was outside of the auto body sector, predominantly because it was going to afford me larger volume and larger transaction size and more efficiency. And I started doing that, and it built on that. And by 1992, 5 years after I started the auto body business, I was actually ready to abandon it because the transaction sizes were too small. And I ultimately did over the course of the next 2 years. And I allowed my service reps to take over their territories and funded them for a while they did it as their own business. And some of them kept going for a few years. But I was no longer interested in a business by that point in time where my average transaction size was $200 or $2,500. There was other things happening at the same time too that threatened the continuity of the business. Introduction of no-fault insurance had an impact. And so, but by that time I was well on my way, and I was doing the non-auto body activity, same business, same concept, just in a non-auto body sector where the volume was much higher. And I did that for a good number of years. In 1992, at the same time that I was doing that, somebody came to me and said that he had a situation where he was a roofing company, and he was putting a roof on a condominium corporation, and they did not want to pay him at the time. They wanted to know if they could take back some paper and pay over the course of 3 or 5 years. And it was the same concept, but now it was a term invoice. It wasn't, just a short-term 30, 60-day contract. And I declined. I knew this guy personally, and he lived in my neighborhood. And about 3 months later, he came back to me again, and he said, I got another one of these. They think I'm a fucking bank, excuse my French. That's the way they were. He was talking to me, right? Yeah, I'm not a bank. Can you buy this paper? And I told him, listen, I can't do this, but look, you're a friend. I'm going to look into it. And I was just curious what was going on. Why did this condominium corporation, 20-year-old building, they wanted to put on a new roof, why didn't they have the money? Why would they ask him to finance this? And what was the credit like? And, I was very happily married at the time, 2 children, but I did not want to waste even 1 minute of my time at the office on this because I thought it was going nowhere. So being a lawyer, I took home a copy of the Condominium Act, and I'm reading. I'm reading it in bed, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to waste any office time, you know what I mean? And I just sort of say, okay, I'm going to read this thing. And Patrick, I have to tell you, my mind nearly blew a fuse. Okay. I couldn't sleep that evening. I just completely got it. Okay. I called up the guy. I said, I'll buy your paper. Okay. The next day, I said, I'll buy your paper. And I did. And it was my first transaction. And that led to the development of something called Condo Corp Term Financing, where I offered a product where I would purchase term debt or loan to condominiums in order to enable them to do major repairs. And the issue that I got, the thing that took hold of me is that these are bodies of governance. These are bodies of governance. This is sovereign debt. You know, if you live in a condominium corporation, you have 4 levels of government. You got your federal, your provincial, your municipal, and you got your condo corp. And they have the right to levy taxes, the monthly contributions.
Yes.
And if you don't pay, they have a lien against your unit that comes in first position. And so they can enforce their debt. But at the same time, like every other democratic government in the world, they have no money. They don't save up money, and they operate, in a way that defers, the short-term cost to people. And there's a whole host of reasons for that. I ended up developing a product called Condo Corp Term Financing. I had to go to different financing sources to back me, but I found them somewhat readily. And before you know it, was doing tens of millions of dollars in this category alone. And today, if you go to our company's website, morrisonfinancial.com, you'll see that we are participants in a national partnership with Meridian Credit Union, who have been our sponsors in this. They provide funding for this. It's an exclusive partnership. So if you go to anywhere in Ontario or Canada and you ask for a condominium corporation loan, it comes, even in a Meridian branch, it'll come through our company, and we do all the front end, they do the back end financing, and it's a great product. We're very, very competitive, and we continue to do tens of millions of dollars in that product alone. Since that time, 1992, I did the first loan in Canada to a condominium corporation that had to do a major repair to its building. And so that was another diversification of the business. One of the financiers for that product early on was a company today known as Equitable Bank, Bank or EQ Bank. It's now, I think, in the top 7 of Canadian banks, not quite in the top 5 or 6, but just outside there. I think they recently beat out Laurentian Bank for that position. But at the time, they were a small trust company. And they were giving me financing. And the CEO of the company called me up one day after I'd been doing this with him for about 2 or 3 years. And he said, let's have lunch. And I said, okay, what are we talking about? Just come down, we'll have lunch and we'll talk, right? So I met with him, and he's no longer CEO. He retired some time ago, but he said, all of our business, we're a one-office trust company, and all of our business comes in through mortgage brokers and other types of brokers out there. And my staff complained that it always comes in a big mess, but they want to do the business, so they have to sort it out. And he said, they say whenever they get a deal from your firm, it always comes in neatly packed, a Curlox binder, table of contents, everything in order. Mm-hmm. They don't have to do anything. They just have to sort of throw it in the file, do the funding, and that's it. And he says, I said, well, that's not unusual. That's my legal training. That's how I was taught to do things when I was practicing law. And I'm just sort of following that same thing. It just seems natural to me. And he said, what else can we do together? And I said, we can't do anything else together. He goes, why? Because you're basically only licensed to be a mortgage company, and our condo loans are classified by the regulators as the equivalent to mortgages. So we're able to do those, but I'm not in the mortgage business. And so I can't see what else we could do together. He said, get into the mortgage business, I'll back you. Okay.
There you go.
And right on the napkin there in the restaurant, he wrote down what the deal was. And in that year, we incorporated Morrison Financial Mortgage Corporation as a wholly owned subsidiary of Morrison Financial Services Limited. And lo and behold, we were in the mortgage business. And I went to some friends of mine who I knew were builders and developers, because that was the space that I wanted to connect in. And that's where he thought it would be a good area for me to be. And I gathered some low-hanging fruit. And before you know it, developed a $60 million mortgage portfolio that was funded in partnership with these guys, with Equitable. And then we went to some other trust companies, started doing the same thing, went to some other banks and started doing the same thing. And before you know it, we had this little mortgage business within the company. And it was sort of operated separately, but together. And, I had different staff on the different transactions. But I really did not regard it as the main part of my business. I really thought of myself as a commercial financier back then, still doing the factoring or whatever. And for a long time, it was the major part of the business. But one of the things that I noticed is that in the mortgage business, as in the condominium loan business, I could layer transactions on top of each other and I could build quite a big portfolio, although my margins were significantly smaller than in the factoring business. But the business stayed for a much longer time and you could develop client relationships. In the factoring business, it tended to go relatively quickly. They either moved on and went to a bank or they went out of business, or you were constantly, it was very difficult to build a significant size portfolio. Whereas in the mortgage and the condominium lending, it was much, much easier. So, it was really for many years just a boutique part of the business, a part within the whole. Over time, though, specifically what happened was my competitor, a key employee from one of my competitors in the condo lending business, left there and left his company and came to join me. And he was on a 1-year non-competition. So we said, okay, you won't go anywhere near our condo business during that time, but why don't we take this mortgage business and see if we can build it? And that's what we did. He focused on that for his whole first year. And as a result of that, over time, and I'm talking now decades, not years, the mortgage lending business, mortgage lending to builders and developers, became our major business. And today it's the main focus of the business. And it's a portfolio in the hundreds of millions, not in the tens of millions. And we're having a good time. But that's basically how the transition happened.
You look at that journey and you look at the story, and I'm here on Zoom with you, so I'm observing and I'm listening. And, there's a whole bunch of directions that, we can go with this conversation in terms of the nuts and bolts and the business. But I also am always intrigued by the journey of, an entrepreneur, the journey of somebody like yourself. I mean, you basically, back in the day when you were a lawyer, you went for a job, took you 3 years to go, this sucks, I'm out, back to the whole conversation about, I don't want to account for my time. And I always want to go back a little bit further, for our listeners, when we consider, seemingly ordinary achieving extraordinary. I mean, you're certainly at the top of the list of that. But where does your roots come from? Like, were your parents entrepreneurs? Were they, where did you get your entrepreneurial spirit from, do you think, David? I mean, I see where being a lawyer and education, that would give you the tools, but what kind of fired you up to be that entrepreneur?
So, I can actually answer that question, believe it or not. Okay. And I think it was a perception of poverty. My parents divorced when I was basically a teenager. They separated when I was, and they married way too young. I mean, they're both great people and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
It just wasn't a marriage that was supposed to be. But as kids, emotionally, we were left somewhat independent from a relatively young age. And I didn't have a lot of support. And, in the old days, Patrick, you're probably old enough to remember this, okay? But a lot of young people won't be, okay? You used to be able to write a check.
Sure, of course.
And you could give the check to somebody in payment.
Yeah.
With the knowledge that the check wouldn't actually hit your bank for 2 or 3 days later, sometimes 4 days later, through the clearing system. Okay. And they would kite the payment, they'd write the check. They didn't have the money in the account, but they knew as long as they got to the bank account in time with the cash, that the check would be covered and there wouldn't be a problem. And this became I was 18 years old. This was part of my ordinary budgeting, I couldn't get through a week without that, And there was a teller. I banked at the local TD bank, and there was a teller there that had grown sort of quite affectionate. Not a romantic relationship, but she was affectionate. She looked at me very affectionately. She understood exactly what was going on, and she would try to help me by holding the check for as long as possible before rejecting it if I didn't get there on time. And over the course of a couple of years, it would happen 2 or 3 times that I would fail to get the money to the bank in time, and my check would bounce. It'd be returned to NSF, and I would show up maybe the next day or a few hours later with the cash to put it in the account. But I was so embarrassed in front of this teller. I was so embarrassed. Like, you have no, because she had sort of befriended me and was trying to support me. And I kind of was letting her down when she held the check. And I remember one time, the last time it happened, I was walking out of the bank. I had made the deposit and I'm holding the receipt in front of me for the deposit. And I said to myself, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but this is not going to be my life. This is not how I'm going to live the rest of my life. I've got to figure some way out of it. So I was kind of driven by the lack of resources in my young life. Now, I came from a culture and a community where education was deemed to be very important. And I did not have the option at that time, although I was very tempted to do it, to just go into business right away. It just, in my mother's sort of rubric of success, that would have been, you were a flunky if you did that, if you didn't have an education. So I felt I had to do that. So I went to U of T. I got my bachelor's degree. I went to law school at Osgood. I graduated, but I sort of always knew going in the back of my mind that I was going to have to figure out a way to get out of this situation. And lo and behold, I did. I ended up, even while I was in law school, running a small business and earning quite a good living, putting myself through law school, living on my own at the time. And so it was driven by not really poverty, but driven by a sense that, this is what it feels like when you don't have the cash flow to get through a week. And I didn't want to live like that. And it became a very strong motivator.
It's interesting. I find, entrepreneurs at the end of the day, they need to survive and they take responsibility for that survival. It's interesting. It's, to your point, it's probably not a conscious thought when you're 17, 18 years old, but when you reflect on it, you realize that what you're driven by is, number one, to your point around the teller, is a little bit of pride, a little bit of shame behind whatever that was, but also just pure survival, going, I have to survive. And you, for whatever reason, I find that with my own entrepreneurial career, although I had a job for about 8 years in the oil field, I knew when I left there that I would never go back to having a job, but it was really built around, I will survive and I will thrive, ultimately, is what, became. But it also came from my case, probably similar to you. I really grew up on the wrong side of the tracks, 4 kids, 1,000 square foot house, 1 bathroom, so we were really living in that kind of lower middle class, I think. But ultimately, I just knew that would not be what satisfied me. And so I became creative and going, I don't know what I'm going to do, but having a job isn't it. And then I started having entrepreneurial accidents. So that's kind of what drove me. But it's interesting that you had that thought process right from kind of the get-go, even though it was kind of living as a subconscious thought, perhaps.
I knew that nobody was going to give it to me. If I didn't go find it, nobody was going to do it. There was nobody in my circle that was just going to, leave me a bunch of money or anything like that. So I just had to do it. And I think that was a driving factor, partially conscious and partially subconscious. It was always there in the back. So, like I said, I think it was a big motivator for me. And I think it would be for anybody, really. But
now, do you have siblings? Do you have siblings along the way, David?
I have an older brother, and my older brother he also went to law school. He became a lawyer. He worked initially in law, then he went and worked in a private business for a while, but then he went back to a legal career. And today he's in his senior years, but he still works as a mediator and arbitrator and has been quite successful in his field. I had a younger sister who was successful, was on the verge of she had been appointed to be she was a teacher. She was appointed to be a principal at her school starting in September. Unfortunately, she died unexpectedly on the August 16th before. She contracted a leukemia, acute myeloid leukemia, and it takes most adults very, very quickly. And she was actually on vacation when it she contracted it, and then I have a younger sister who works in the payments business, and so it
Yep.
was a family of four. Three of
Yeah.
us left, and yeah, it was just an interesting dynamic, just because of our whole parental situation. Our parents having married young, and having in many ways abandoned us emotionally, is the way I like to say it. They didn't abandon us physically, but there was
Yeah.
an element of that too,
Oh,
and
sure. That's what parents do, though, right? They never do it on purpose. It's just how life kind of comes at us.
my brother and I like to remark that ironically, they may have been good parents by being bad parents, in the sense that, they throw you in the water, you're there, you got to go
Yeah,
survive, you got to go do it. But we were
sure.
more parents, the kids were more parents, like my brother and I were more parents to my sisters than my parents were, My brother was a parent to me, and we just sort of survived together. And it was, it didn't seem so bad at that time, I have to tell you,
Mhm.
it didn't really seem so bad, but it was a huge motivator. There's no question about it.
Well, I guess there's a part of it too where, depending on where you are in life and how you view the world, if you're constantly or not, I would say comparing yourself to something else. Back then as well, we didn't have the social media comparisons. We weren't clicking on a Facebook Live to see how everybody else seems to be living the good life. This was just life. And so there was no comparisons to be made. And this was our life. And we just lived it. And that was kind of what happened. Those days seem to have changed, though, of course. And we see lots of, I guess, victimness because of that, perhaps. But it is an interesting journey from those times.
For sure. Absolutely.
So tell me something here, David. You've got into this business, and the other thing that I hear as you're speaking, which is sometimes rare in any entrepreneur, is now you took your business to the next level. I get that it was over years, but you obviously at some point were able, you saw that 100 grand, for example, from Shoppers, I think it was, but, ultimately you went from the vision of littler numbers, smaller numbers into the next level. But these are expansive in terms of our ability to kind of look at those numbers and not be intimidated by them. And as you're getting into millions of dollars and tens of millions of dollars, are you at the effect of that expansiveness? Like that takes something mentally from people to be able to do that.
Well, it does. I mean, one of the things, now you're getting into what are the characteristics of an entrepreneur, of somebody who can behave entrepreneurially, and what is your ability to manage risk and perceived risk, and how do you manage it? And these are all important questions. Some of the things that I might answer in response to that have become somewhat cliche. Okay, so for example, most people that have done something like what I've done will tell you that when they go to work, it doesn't feel like work. It's their fun. They're having fun. They really enjoy. They're immersed in what you're doing. And most of the time, that's the way I was. I kind of lived my work. I enjoyed my work. And so that was an important, thing for me. Now, in terms of risk and dealing with larger transactions, I've always been willing and able to play near the edge. Okay, I was always willing and able to manage that issue by compartmentalization. I always, when you're running and starting a business and developing a business, there's no map that takes you through. You have to have, imagine that you just have to have the confidence that whatever problem that you're going to encounter, you're going to find a solution, and you're going to diverge, and you're going to go around it. You're going to figure it out. You're going to get past the obstacle, and you're going to keep going. If you don't have that confidence, if you can't compartmentalize your fears and your sense of risk, you can't actually be in business. You have to just go get a job, and let somebody else bear that. It's a very, very important trait that I think all entrepreneurs have, some more so than others,
I think
more so.
let me just unpack that a little bit with you, David, because I think, when I, in the space that the real estate investment networks, and I've been played in now for over 20 years, working with real estate investors and entrepreneurs, as well as being an entrepreneur myself for so many years. It's interesting what you just said, because that's part of the decision-making process, and I've got a good friend of mine who says, like he's one of those guys, he's, to your point, he'll kind of weigh the facts, and he'll jump out of the plane without the parachute with 100% confidence that he'll build the parachute on the way down and it will be fine. He'll solve whatever problems he needs to solve while in the air. And he also believes that you can't stand on a sideline solving a problem. You actually have to get moving in order to understand the context of the problem so that you can solve it. But that's as much mindset as it is character. And I believe it can be developed if people can see that. What's your thoughts, David? I mean, you did it. Did you develop that trait in yourself, or was it kind of by nature?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. I personally, now, I'm not necessarily right, okay, in saying
none of this is about right. This is our experience.
I think it's innate. I don't think you can develop it. I think the characteristic of an entrepreneur is you have it or you don't have it. Okay, it's innate. It's like genetic. It's like a talent. Or
it's just it's a way you think. It's just that is a genetic predisposition to just go. If there's a problem, I'm going to fix it.
Yeah, I think you can take people who don't have that and you can make them into better business people through training and through all that kind of stuff. But I don't think that you can create that fundamental ability to tolerate risk and to operate in the environment of risk and to just go do it blindly, which you're required to do in business. You know, you just don't have anybody with a compass and a map that's telling you where to go. I believe it's innate. Okay. I wish I could tell you otherwise. I'd like to tell you that you could go to school and learn to be an entrepreneur, but I don't think that you can. You have it or you don't have it. Sorry.
Well, I think there's got to be there. You know, this is an interesting path to maybe go down for a minute, David, is that there's got to be a willingness to perceivably and or actually fail. In other words, you're not going to solve every problem every time in a timely manner in a way that doesn't cost you something. So how do you handle failure?
So the first point is I want everybody listening to this to understand that if anybody thinks that this was a straight line on a 45-degree angle up, okay, for me, let me tell you,
it was like the perfect trajectory.
we've got a lot to talk about, okay, because I have had all kinds of ups and downs and sideways and all around. And what I often tell people is, doesn't matter, okay, doesn't matter. Just always keep moving. Just keep going forward. The only score that counts is the score at the end, and you're not finished playing. And just keep going. And it's all the cliches are applicable. Okay, it's if it doesn't kill you, makes you stronger. That one.
All of them. Yeah, sure. I always say that the reason there's cliches is because they actually mean something. And at any given time, just pull one off the shelf. It applies.
But it's so true. It's so true. Okay. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to change me, like who I am now. You know what I mean?
Yep.
At this age, I am what I am, for better or for worse. That's it. I often have to tell my family that. Okay. when my wife's bugging me to do something that I haven't been doing, they listen, you know what you got. It's not going to change at this point. And so the thing is that, by the way, I say that as the most happily married guy in the world.
Of course, sure.
The point though is that it wasn't a straight line. Don't make the same mistake twice. I've done that too, by the way. Unfortunately,
haven't we all? Yeah.
But try not to, and try to keep improving on yourself, and just and it just gets easier most of the time. The longer you keep going, and you get the feel of it. You get the feel of the trajectory, and you get the feel of when you're doing something wrong. And then you arrive at a point where you have something that is not intelligence. It comes by a different word, wisdom. You get wisdom. Mm-hmm. And wisdom is the intelligence that comes from experience and just having seen people over and over again and been in many situations, and you can just sense where you're going, and you're able to avoid the worst problems in that kind of situation. So it's not about blindly just going forward. It's about applying your wisdom and about constantly evaluating or reevaluating where you're at and what you're doing, and responding and adjusting and trimming the sails so that you keep going in the right direction. And it never stops, really. You can never stand still in business, by the way. I tell people this all the time. If you're doing something that's good and profitable, somebody else is going to figure it out and they're going to start copying you and they're going to lower the margin. And you better be thinking about the next thing, We've all heard of Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs. I found that one of the interesting reads was Walter Jacobson's biography of Steve Jobs.
Yeah, so good.
He talks about a lot of different things, but one of the things that I admired about him was that he was always like way out there, looking like way ahead, not in the next 2 or 3 steps, but was way out there. And you have to sort of be impressed by that. And most of these guys that have become world famous, I'm talking about the Bill Gateses, Elon Musk's, Steve Jobs of the world, and there's many others, Jeff Bezos. They are able to have that vision and to realize that vision and how they're able to change the lives of human beings. I'm nowhere close to that category.
But having said that, is actually, you prefaced the question that I was waiting to ask you, which was, when you look at what you developed, were you creating a vision for yourself or a outcome in each layer or level of business that you got to that you were working backwards from? Was it something that you said, okay, this is where I see the business in 2, 3, 5 years, 10 years? How did you, or were you literally just paddling and dealing with what came up and growing from that direction? Were you a goal setter kind of thing, visions guy?
I think that the honest answer to that, Patrick, is that I've developed my business predominantly in response to opportunities that have come to me. Okay, so somebody came to me, asked me a question, or somebody came to me and presented an opportunity, and then that became something to pursue. I always looked at individual transactions, asking myself the question, is there a real business here? Can I replicate this transaction? If this guy needed this, is there somebody else who's going to need the same thing? I was always interested in programs. I wasn't interested in simply doing a one-off transaction. So everything I looked at that way, but it was predominantly opportunities that came to me. And this is one of the things that I tell young people all the time. I've told my nephew recently, who's a graduate of various degrees, but looking for what to do. If you wait trying to figure out what the perfect thing to do is, you'll wait your whole life for that. But I tell young people who want to be in business, who really have that sort of entrepreneurial bent, just pick something and start doing it. Okay, start doing it. It's when you're in business that opportunity is presented to you. Okay. Now, you have to be thoughtful about what you start doing and how you start doing it. But it's when you're active that you're meeting people, you're talking to people, you come across this person, you come across that person, and opportunities then come to you. If you're sitting at home trying to figure out what to do, nobody's calling you. Mm-hmm. Nobody's calling you. You have to get active and just start doing something. And my case is a classic one and point. I just dove into a financial services business from nowhere. Okay. I managed to convince banks to back me from the get-go. And as a result of that, people heard, oh, this guy's doing financing. Oh, I need some financing. And then I need some. And then before that, you're talking to somebody about this. And I've told you bits and pieces of the story already. Opportunities came to me because I was, it's something equivalent to creating your luck. You know what I mean? Great athletes create their luck. They don't just score. They're able to create situations that enable them to score, and we call it creating your luck. A golfer gets a hole in one, not because he can hit a hole in one every time, but he's good enough to get near the hole most of the time. And that it creates an enhanced likelihood that he's going to get that hole in one.
And he golfs a lot. It's an interesting concept here, David, that, I love what you're talking about in terms of creating opportunities. Now, it's like, were you consciously creating opportunities, or were you just doing what you do and out of that came opportunities? It's like, were you that guy that was out shaking hands, kissing babies, talking about what you were doing? Or were you just a guy who worked hard, did a great business, and because of your reputation, because of your character, people approached you? Because I know that listeners right now, people are going, well, how the hell do you create opportunities? I've been waiting to create opportunities. Like, how is it that you did it? Was it conscious, unconscious, just how shit showed up? What was it?
Yeah, it was really a combination of both. Okay, so the original opportunities that I created, I've just sort of described how the business got started.
Yep.
I've tried honestly to maintain a good reputation throughout to leave all business transactions with people happy at both ends. I haven't been 100% successful in every case, but for, years and years, I've tried to do that. So I think that I'm approachable, and people regard our organization as having integrity and being fair. And so opportunities came to me. I already talked about the CEO of Equitable coming to talk to me because we had a good relationship in the condo lending business. I talked about how that condo lending business started. It was really just talking to people, but always with a sense of understanding, and trying to curious about what's going on. One of the things that my kids will tell you, if you ever get a chance to talk to them, is that in all kinds of situations, I was always, even as a young person, trying to understand the dynamic in which I was in any given moment. So, for example, even sitting in a restaurant, one time when my son was young, I picked up a salt shaker, okay, that was on our table in the restaurant. And I said to him, let's try to name all of the businesses that had to come together and offer their products and services in order for this simple little salt shaker to end up here on our table. And you'll be surprised, okay, how many have to touch this thing. And remember, the salt shaker came, in a glass container. There was salt inside the glass. It had a screw top, metal on top, and we start trying to list, and we're writing it down on a napkin, the person who harvested the sand that had to be burned to make the glass, and the silicone that went into that. And then the metal, what went into the metal, and how did the metal get polished? Somebody had to have a brush to polish that metal and the glass, and then the whole delivery chain and all that kind of stuff. And where did the salt come from, and how did it get refined? And you just think about how complex our world is. But because of that complexity, there is opportunity literally everywhere. You just have to be able to see it. You just have to be able to see it. And people either see it or they don't see it. Entrepreneurs tend to see it, okay? And they grab onto it and they ride with it, sometimes more successfully than others, but others just don't see it.
Well, it's interesting that there was a book, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to ever read the book by Tim Ferriss called Tools of Titans, and where he did it was amazing thought process that he had, where he actually sent out an email to I think it was 200 CEOs of big corporation and big names. And he asked them a certain set of questions and then just offered to say, would you answer these? And he got a huge response. And it was a cool story about how he wrote the book. But within the book were these major CEOs of big corporations. And to your point, there's one of the things that they learned to do, and almost all of them said it at some point, was they learned to say no more times than they said yes. And, in that context, any wisdom that you learned over the years, because you're seeing so many opportunities, especially given, the financial, extremes that we go to in Canada when it comes to real estate and funding projects. What have you learned in terms of saying no to opportunities? Because lots of young entrepreneurs, especially, say yes to so many things. The next thing you know, they're fighting fires, or they're things are not things are crumbling around them. What anything that you would add to that conversation, David?
I would say I've definitely said no to more opportunities than yes, but I have to tell you that along the way, I've made a couple of venture capital investments. Okay, that's not really what my company does, but they came my way, and with mixed results. With results. So I've had some that were relatively small that flopped. I had one that I thought flopped, but it recently skyrocketed, and I don't know where it's going now. It's going to be really interesting. It might turn into a unicorn, okay, like one of those billion-dollar companies. It's certainly poised that it looks like it could. And then I've had some in between. And so I don't really know about where I stand on saying no to more than yes, or, like that whole thing. You just have to be careful what you
Sure.
do. I want to say that if I had any criticism of myself that I would inflict upon myself, having, evaluated my career, I would say that I could have been a lot more successful had I truly, truly embraced something, by the way, which I'm doing now. Okay. The concept of professional management. Okay. So my company has been successful, but it still is a relatively small company. And it was really, for much of its history, David Morrison with a few people around him.
Mm-hmm.
And I never leveraged high quality, educated management to take me to go forward where I could move into the background, and I think maybe that was an ego problem I had,
Sure.
I'm getting cured of it very quickly right now,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm 67 years old, and what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to develop a management team for the next generation. And I got a bunch of 30 somethings in here, and I'm trying to set them up so that they can actually take over. I've even devolved equity upon them, and I'm starting to where it doesn't matter that I'm the owner. It doesn't matter that I'm the leader. I got to figure out how am I getting out of this? You know what I mean?
Well,
Where's it going?
it's interesting because, at this point in my life, and something that I have discovered as well, I'm not quite as old as you. I'm 64, but I've also learned along the way, and I wish I would have learned it earlier. And I think probably in hindsight, you'd probably say the same thing, which is if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room, and as a CEO of our businesses, if I had a lesson that I wish I would have gotten sooner, is surround myself with way smarter people than me, which I did not do until far later in my business. And I look back and I go, oversight, big oversight.
It's my major criterion now in hiring. If I don't think they're smarter than me, then I don't want them here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've got no ego at play anymore in this world.
Yeah.
But I think I did too much in the early years.
Yeah.
And I could have developed even more success and been and had more independence today, be more liberated today had I done that. But you know what? I figured it out. I'm working on it. And I expect that within another 3 years from now, I'll be completely non-executive management of the company. I'll sit as chair of the company. I'll sit on the credit committee. But I'm already slowly getting removed from day to day, and it feels pretty good.
I got so many different directions I want to take this conversation, David, because there's lots of learning in it, but I'm also curious in a number of other ways. But let me go back, and only because you kind of put it there, you could have been far more successful. I mean, let's face it, by 99.9% of anybody's standards, you're very successful. But how do you rate and how do you look at yourself? Do you have a kind of picture of what success is for you?
So the answer is it's changing as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's changing as we speak. Again, it's coming from wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The type of wisdom that you only gain by just getting older and observing different situations.
I should only have old guys like us on the show. That's really where the wisdom lives in the learning. But go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Well, they say often that youth is wasted on young people.
It is, but it's true.
But what's happened with me is in my adult years, I've managed to be exposed to some super wealthy business people. And I've been in a community of, I'm going to say, extreme wealth. Okay. Mm-hmm. Some billionaires, hundreds of millions of dollars like this.
Yep.
And some of it inherited.
Yep.
Inherited, not earned. Okay. And some of it earned, or partially earned or came together, however you want to describe it. And I've observed a lot of different things. Okay. And one of them is that money will make your life a little more convenient. But if you think it's going to make you happy, when the fundamentals are not there, you're just mistaken. You're chasing the wrong thing. And I think that a lot of us in our culture are chasing the wrong thing. And as I get older, I realize this, that the things that are of value in my life, the things that enable me to self-actualize. I've been teaching my kids this since they were very young. You have to have an important relationship in your life, interpersonal relationship. You have to, maybe even more than one, but at least one interpersonal relationship in your life. And the second thing is you have to self-actualize, but self-actualizing isn't necessarily about earning money. It's not all about money. Okay. Self-actualizing is doing something that is hard to do, that takes a long time to do, and persisting at it and setting goals intermediary goals along the way. If you're not self-actualizing, it's very difficult to be happy. And so, I regard my business as just the way I self-actualize. But it could have been something else. It might have been as an athlete or as a musician or as an artist or as something else. I have respect for all of those, and I think that, when it comes to business and, chasing money and all that, it comes to a limit where, each incremental dollar that you earn has less and less marginal enjoyment associated with it. You really, that's why you see very rich people just start giving it away, because they can't really do anything with it, And so I discourage people from sort of, I try to encourage people to just remain balanced about what's really valuable in their lives. I have an acquaintance of mine who was a billionaire, one of the wealthiest guys in Canada, recently got cancer and passed away.
Yeah. It is interesting, right? I've come to a conclusion a long time ago that, and this was a couple things. Number one, I love nice things, but I am no longer, and haven't been for a long time, obsessed about it. I joke about it all the time. I don't want to have to insure it. I don't have to wash it. I don't want to have to worry about scratching it. I don't need bells and whistles because I've had that in my past and realized that didn't make me any more happy. Although I enjoyed it, it wasn't all that great. But there was something that was interesting about all of this. And I want to go back into a conversation that you had. Just, this is more of a philosophical kind of tangent I'm going on here, David. But you said something about a circle of influence of very wealthy. And in that, some made their wealth and some did not. And it was interesting that I read kind of an article, if you will, about a trust funder. And he actually shared his insights into being a trust funder. And he goes, the problem with being a trust funder is no matter what you do, you'll always be a trust funder. It won't matter what you accomplish. It won't matter what you build. It will not matter how much you give away, how much you could build $1 billion business, and in behind it, everybody will be saying, yeah, but he's a trust funder. He had all the money. He had it made.
I can name people, I won't, who suffered from that from a young age. Mm-hmm. And it's not a pleasurable situation, because they've been robbed of the opportunity of being recognized as having self-actualized themselves.
Yes.
And, I don't think I do my kids any favor if what I do is I just dump on them a bunch of money. Okay. Yeah. I've tried to teach them to self-actualize and to create self-worth from within themselves by what they're doing. And they're actively involved in that today. And I think it's very, very important. And speaking to the other issue, I tell people I'm becoming more and more Buddhist every day that goes by.
Yeah, I agree.
In the philosophy of Buddhism, they considered nirvana was when you were divorced from any need for anything material in this world whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
You could live happily in your mind, meditating in your mind. And the older I get, the less I need things, okay? And the less things, like I realized a while ago, when you die and people think back upon you, nobody is going to remember what car you drove.
Nobody.
They're not really going to remember what house you lived in or what the furniture looked like or anything like that. Okay. But if you did something, you helped somebody in a time and I have many examples of this because I was in the financial services business where I helped people in their businesses at a time when they need money. I loaned them money. And some of them today, they paid me back a long time ago. But some of them today I'm still friends with, and I know, and they've gone on to be successful. And when it comes time, people are looking back at me, I know those people will be thinking not about what car I drove in, okay? And they'll be telling people, when I really needed it, he was the guy who loaned me the money, and look where I'm at today. And I have one case, an example that gives me joy every time I think back on it. But when I was in the factoring business, we had a client. It was a company that it was a public company. I'm not sure if I should be mentioning the names, okay? But we gave them financing, and I got to know the CFO and I got to know the president of the company very, very well. And then what happened was they got sold into one of these hedge funds in New York, and it was kind of a crooked operation. Long and behold, they came back to me 5 years after I paid them out, after they paid me out, I'm sorry, and they said, we've got an opportunity. Bob and I, it was the CFO calling me, it was this woman and her boss, the president of the company. Bob and I have a chance to buy the company. And they said, but we need $3 million. And I said, okay, well, let's get together. Let's meet. Like, I like them. I had done this business with them before in the past. I said, let's get, I'm available like the next week or the week after. And they said, no, you don't understand. We got to close in 10 days. Okay. And I said, and the reason why, there was a competing offer. The hedge fund had gone into receivership, and the receiver was selling off the assets. It was a competing offer. And they said, look, if you're going to sell the company, can't you give management a chance to buy it? And he said, well, yes, but I'm not going to let this other offer go. You got 10 days, go. So I said, get to my office. They came in and they arrived at 9:30 in the morning, and we stayed in my office straight through for about 10 hours. We negotiated a deal. I gave them the money. We bought the company within the 10 days. And I took an equity stake in that. So today they're my partners. And I just can't tell you how successful it's been. And I love these guys because I've never actually been in the office. I've never gone to the company's office. They took what I did. They paid me back in 2 or 3 years. But they're so appreciative to this day. I know that I made a difference in their lives. They've gone on and they've had their own success. But it's not just me. I gave them the opportunity, but they ran with the opportunity. In a football game, it's one thing to give the ball to somebody, but that guy's got to be able to run with it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Somebody's got to run with the ball. I gave them the ball, but they ran with it so beautifully, and they've done very, very well. It's a multi-million-dollar company now, and it's just been a great thing. And I've benefited from it, but really, what gives it the pleasure is being able to have made that difference in their lives. And I got 100 stories like that.
Well, I think that's I've often said, within the Real Estate Investment Network, with what we do, we've literally educated now at this point tens of thousands of people that have gone on to do and build their own financial future investing in real estate. That was the education, that was the research that we did. And that's, I was always built around contribution. So somewhere in me all the time, I was built to say, how can I support somebody else's success? And that's what lit me up. Now, when you look at what you've done over the years, you just shared a great story, and you've said you've done it hundreds of times, which of course, in that space that you played, you're probably making a huge difference. And there's a lot of contribution that comes with just that whole model of what you do. But did you have an awareness around that part of what you do at some point, creating win-win situations and or supporting others in achieving success? And was that contribution part, was that a conscious thing at a fairly early age with you, do you think, David?
I don't know if it was a conscious thing, but I can tell you that it's part of my nature.
Yeah.
To want to open a transaction and close a transaction successfully, shake hands and say, well, it was good for you, it was good for me, what I mean? That kind of thing,
Yeah.
That was always the way I approached stuff. I really didn't want to argue with people. I didn't want to fight with people. I didn't want to litigate with people. I just wanted to open and close transactions successfully and be recognized as having done that. And most of my career has been that way. Not every transaction has ended successfully, there's no question. But the thing is that it's been that way. And I think it was an innate part of my character, really.
When you look into the future, again, you've had, you've built a great business, you've helped a lot of people, you've made a lot of money. You're at a point in your life where you're trying to reconfigure so that you can make sure that, the business carries on and you're not at the helm on a day-to-day basis. So when you think about the word retirement, what does that sound like or mean to you, do you think, David?
For me, it's a swear word. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not gonna happen in the classical sense. Yeah. I'm not going to go golf.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit on a beach. Those images they show the guy sitting on the beach. I will always work, but I don't want to be in day-to-day operations and administrative company forever. I'm getting to the point where I've had enough of that. I don't really need that. I
Yep.
want to give other people the opportunity. I still want to be able to harvest that. But all of the things that typically motivate us are out of my system. I don't have any ego. I don't need more. I just want to figure out a way to stay involved. I'll be mostly a capital provider to the business going forward. My money will stay in the business. It will enable the young people that take over to have a platform on which they operate. And probably it will remain in the business, all other things being equal, until the day I die. And then they'll inherit my children,
Yeah.
as beneficiaries of my estate. But by that time, I will probably have trained my children to be hands off.
Yeah.
Take their dividends, but don't interfere with good management.
Yeah, stay the hell out. I always joke that I'm on the Freedom 95 program because I still love what I do, and as long as I love what I do, I'll continue to do it. And I think that's a great way to look into the future, at least for me. And it sounds like you're kind of a similar mindset. Tell me something along the way, David, is that you've had a team of people, you are leading a team, you talk about self-actualization. Was there a part of you that, when you look at the personal development space, I mean, as a lawyer, there's lots of professional development. You're kind of wired to study in terms of business acumen, and you were obviously good at it. But when you look at who you were as a leader and how you handled people, perhaps, was there a conscious effort to learn to be a great leader? Did you study that part of it? Or was that something that just kind of also was a little bit innate for you?
That's a good question. First of all, I'm not sure that I am a great leader. Okay. I think that ego of my own played too much of a role in the way I led in the past, and that limited me. But I'm getting over it. I'm getting sure I'm recovering, And but the thing that I wanted to mention is that, it's one of these things where, again, there's no template. There's no book that can tell you that. There's people that will tell you that they've written books on this and how to manage people and all that, how to influence people, make friends and influence people, all that kind of stuff. But there really is no template. But, scientists have told us that the human body is at least 70% water. Did you know that?
Yeah, yeah. I did know that.
70% water. Okay, yeah. Right? And so, the human body, 70% water. Think about that. Okay. I mean, I don't want to make this sound too weird. Okay. But basically, we're bags of water. Okay. Sure. And when you manage a company, okay, you're managing a bunch of bags of water beside each other. Okay. And, and they're not firm. They're jiggly. And what I mean by that is they got all kinds of things going on. They're sort of controlled by this nerve center up in the brain, okay, synapses and all that kind of stuff. But, one of the lies that I was taught when I was young was that we were all born equal. And my parents were trying to teach me not to discriminate against people of color or anything like that. Okay? Yes. To be very liberal minded. And that's the way I've raised my kids, and that's what I am. Okay. But that's what they were trying to teach me. But what they meant by all born equal is they meant that we're all entitled to equal rights before the law. We're all equally entitled to human dignity and to be treated with, basic respect and all of those things. Okay. But the idea that we're all born equal, I realized was a fallacy. We're not all born equal. One of my hobbies, I like to play tennis. Okay. I love playing tennis, and my wife and I play tennis all the time. I didn't start the sport till I was 48 years old. Okay. Yep. But, I don't care how much I practice. I don't care how many lessons I have. Okay. I'm never going to play like Roger Federer or Rafael Nadal or any of the top 4, 10 players. I'm never even going to play as good as a head coach at the club that I used to belong to. Yep. You know what I mean? And he's a relative unknown. Okay. Right. And so, people have talents. Talent is a natural thing, okay? And then we come with different personalities. Some of us are hardworking. Some of us are lazy. I don't indict anybody, it's just what we are. Some of us are very intelligent. Some of us are less so. Some of us have, as I said, athletic talents and stuff like that. Some of us are very emotional, and others of us aren't emotional. We're able to contain that. Yeah. And, basically, when you're trying to run an organization, you're bringing all these bags of water together, and they're all governed by these jiggly things that are happening up there. Okay. And it's really difficult. It's really difficult. So, one of the things that can condemn an organization is when you don't know it. Okay. But there's a jealous rivalry going on between two lower employees in your company, and one's sabotaging the other, or something like that. Or maybe there's a feeling of insecurity by an employee that is affecting the way he's performing his job or what he's doing. The most common one that I've seen is where somebody is trying to control their sphere of influence and not teaching somebody else any part of their job because they think that that is going to limit them in like, because now they'll be dispensable, okay, because somebody else knows how to do the job. They don't realize that the most valuable person in the company is the one that can teach any job and willingly does so, because you want that person, because if somebody else leaves, they can train that person, you know. And so you've got all these things going on, okay, coupled with each one of them dealing with stuff in their own personal lives, whatever might be going on, a breakup, a girlfriend, a divorce, like whatever it is, home life challenges, you know, maybe their own financial problems, you know, and you're trying to manage this whole thing. There's no rule, you know, there's no rule book that's going to tell you exactly what to do. And sometimes you'll say something that might offend an employee. You don't even know you said it, okay, but they're offended, or they took something a different way. And, you know, it's a real talent to be able to keep long-term employees happy and loyal and working with the company. And I've had mixed success with that. I've had some people that have been with me for like 20 years and others that have come and gone in short periods of time. And I just really have come to understand that that is the central challenge of running a business, trying to get all of those people working towards that same goal and moving in one direction. It's not dissimilar to the analogies that you'll sometimes see with sports teams. You know. Like,
well, it's interesting that you, but that's exactly it. Yeah, I'll just interject with a quick story. But you know, there was a time in my life where I was able to, and I did spend a lot of time with a guy by the name of Bill Comrie, who actually owned the Brick at one point in time, and my wife and I were in California at Bill and his wife's house, and we were sitting there. He actually gave me the book Good to Great to read it. But we were talking about his success. And I asked him the question. I said, Bill, you come from these humble beginnings, and could have been a professional hockey player. And now you've built this, almost $1 billion business. And we talked about how he did it. And, he said at the end of the day, he said, as the kind of pointy end of the spear, the driver of this bus, he says, I'm really a coach. And he says, I'm only as good as the people I surround myself with and my ability to coach those people, which is really, in some regards, really what you're saying, the ability to look at your team, coach them through the shit that they got to get through. I don't, that's what he shared that with me. It always stuck with me. But, is that similar to your thought process here?
It's how I spend 99% of my business time now.
Yeah.
I actually will avoid, if at all possible, taking on a task. I want to guide somebody through that task. I want them to take a first stab at it, and then I want to talk about it. I don't just want to do it. In the old days, I might have.
Yep.
I've learned now, if I'm going to get this team where I want them to go, they have to have practice, and it's all about coaching and trying to get, as we said, people that are fundamentally smarter than me.
Can we do it? Yes, you can do it. Well,
and keeping them motivated and keeping them happy and trying to shape them to work together as a team. And as I said, it's a path you go into. It's a bit of a jungle. There's no clear demarcations that tell you where to go. You just constantly adjust. But what I have done is learn that, you can't run an organization where you make anybody indispensable. No. You have to try to do it, make sure that you've covered that base, because you'll never know when somebody's going to say, hey, look, I'm out of here for one reason or another. And you have to be prepared to deal with that. And so
there's a coach that many years ago taught me this lesson, and we don't ever want to lose good people. But the reality is that we often do. And secondly, sometimes we have to get rid of people that are good in what they do, but just really toxic to the environment. And I've had to make those decisions. And, I've had this, discussion with executive team, for example, and they'll go, you can't get rid of them. And it's going to be too costly. And I always go back to the rule that I was taught, and that is the hit by the bus rule. And I go, something, this person has to go for the reasons they have to go. And if they got hit by a bus, I would deal with it. And at the end of the day, if I get hit by a bus, the team's got to be able to deal with it. But that's my fundamental. If somebody got hit by the bus, would you be able to deal with it? And the answer is yes. And so that's where I based my decision on.
So it's funny that you mentioned that, because my company has a large banking relationship.
Sure.
And one of the terms of that banking relationship is that I have key man insurance. They consider me the key man.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
So my life is insured for several millions of dollars.
Sure.
Okay. And that will go into the company and it'll go to the bank to help repay any indebtedness that exists at the time if I should happen to pass away, right? So what's happened now, I got that policy when I was like 32 years old.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm 67 years old and the premiums go up every decade.
A lot.
Right?
Yeah.
So now I'm at the stage where they really climb. And,
Yeah.
and you ask yourself, is it economically makes sense to continue paying these premiums? You
Yeah.
know? And so we recently were in a discussion with the bank and I said, look, you have this key man insurance, but this may be the last year. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to convince them, and I think rightly so, I'm not key anymore.
Yeah.
You don't need me, okay?
Yeah.
If I suddenly get pulled out, your ability to get repaid, your ability to see these assets managed to conclusion so that you guys are repaid, it doesn't require me. As a matter of fact, I'm not even involved in that activity on a day-to-day basis. It's my employees that are handling that. I'm approving new credits. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I'm looking at the growth of the business. I'm coaching employees, but I'm not the guy who's managing your money right now. And I'm having some success.
Good for you, David.
I'm just now approaching the point where they're kind of recognizing that I'm not really key, even though I'm the guy who has the key man insurance.
Beautiful.
Might have been 2 decades ago, but it's that way now. So, and you want it to be that way. You
Yes.
don't want to. If you're pulled out, suddenly there's I hope there'll be a little bit of sadness, maybe. That they'll be coming to recognize my presence in their life and not to make sure that I'm planted. And
so, David, as we start winding down, still got a kind of a segment that I like to do here, which is a few rapid fire questions, and they're generally not that rapid fire, but let's see what we can do to handle some questions as we kind of wind down the show here today.
Let's try it.
Let's try it. Do you have a favorite book that you read or one that you gift?
Favorite book that I read or one that I gift? There is an answer to that question, but I'm trying to, I'll tell you one that I love.
Sure,
okay?
please.
Short novella, that was written by John Steinbeck. It's called The Pearl.
The Pearl? Yeah.
Are you familiar with that?
That went way back in my memory banks. That's from years ago.
But that's a little story.
Yeah.
It's a little parable about a primitive village, where
now it's coming back to me.
They earn their sustenance by diving for pearls.
Yep.
Pearl divers, right? In the South Pacific Island or something like that, right? Yep. And they live this peaceful, bucolic existence, And one day, what happens is one of the divers finds this amazing pearl, like beyond anything that they've ever seen. Okay. And he harvests that pearl and it becomes known amongst the village that he has it. And what happens is it changes the whole character
dynamic,
of their existence, because suddenly there's jealousy because somebody differentiated themselves. Suddenly there's greed. Suddenly infighting starts because he's
Good lessons.
And it's very Shakespearean in the way it investigates the eruption of all of these traits of human, and ultimately it destroys the peacefulness in their village. And of course, I'm not telling you anything by telling you the end, but he walks up to the edge of the ocean and he whips the pearl back as far into the water as he can because he just wants life to go back to normal as it was. And,
Interesting.
It's a very, very interesting story, one of my favorites. And so I often encourage people to read that because I want them to understand human nature.
Good lessons in there. Yeah.
It's not about business, it's about human nature.
Beautiful.
So,
your room, your desk, or your car? What do you clean first?
definitely my desk.
You like a clean desk. Okay, got it.
I like a clean desk. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite swear word?
The usual.
Well, listen, I've got people, it cracks me up all the time because I F-bomb all the time. I swear like a construction worker sometimes. But the question, and then I have people that go, no, I don't swear. I go, really?
No, I swear the time I swear the most is on a tennis court when I flub a shot.
Of course.
When I had a really easy shot that I should have had.
So a buddy of mine lives on a golf course on a tee, at a tee, and I call it, everybody calls it golf. I call it whap fuck, because he grew up sitting in not grew up, but he sits in his backyard at the tee box, and that's all he hears, whap fuck. So I go, okay, that's what he calls golf these days.
My dad used to call the game of bingo, oh shit.
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody would yell out bingo and everybody else would go, oh shit.
Are you a music buff? Do you have a favorite tune? Favorite band?
No, but my music sensibilities largely come from the 60s and 70s, which in my view was like the golden age of music.
Sure. Are you now a mature rocker, or what do you like?
Well, I spent much of my time in my youth playing guitar and piano and all that. I can't do it anymore. I have a condition called Dupuytren syndrome. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
No, never heard of it.
But I've had to have some surgery. It's resulted in a neuropathy in my left hand, so I can't do much of that anymore. Yeah. But I used to quite a bit. But no, all of the stuff that we used to listen to in the 60s and 70s and all that nostalgic stuff, it's still very meaningful to me. And I like some of the modern stuff as well. I do listen to a lot of music. I like music. I'm into it, but I wouldn't say I have a favorite per se.
Yep.
I like all genres and
good for you.
Listen to all stuff. Yeah.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you get to the gates?
Welcome.
Welcome. Just as good as any. And David, final question. What are you grateful for today?
I would say more than anything else, my wife.
Gosh, isn't that the case? Hey, where would we be without our wives?
I know some people would have a different view of that.
Well, I don't. So my view is yours. Yeah.
I didn't get married until I was relatively late. I was 32 when I got married. I met my wife at 31. We were both working professionals at the time. I was a lawyer. She was a medical doctor, and it was just the best decision I ever made in my life.
Fantastic. And I, too, am grateful for my wife, but I'm also grateful for having the opportunity to have met you and have you join me on the show today, David. There's so much great stuff in our conversation today. Lots of lessons to be learned and gained from anybody who's followed this long. I know that you would have picked up a lot of good insights based on what David shared with us today. So, David, thank you very, very much. And this dude, I think there's got to be a part 2 to this. I see another one coming down the road. There's still lots of wisdom that you've got to share.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, David. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. If you found value in the podcast, please take the time to rate and review and share with others. Share with your friends. As it is my goal to always improve and to provide the highest value for you, the listener. If you have any comments, suggestions, or questions you'd like answered, please email me at ceo@reincanada.com. That's ceo@reincanada.com. I look forward to hearing from you. And until next time, Patrick out.